Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening, and thank you, both of you, for speaking with me. For those of you who haven't had the chance to read Mystics and Skeptics yet, like you heard in the introduction, it's a sort of, it contains mythical and factual accounts of mystics and mystical traditions that are rooted in the Himalayas. It's a book of Himalayan wonders and miracles. It's a testament to how unfathomably diverse and complex spiritual traditions from India are. On these pages, you will meet the most fascinating seekers, seers, saints, philosophers. And if you do read the book, which I hope you will if you haven't, you might just be inspired to re-examine what you believe, you see, and you know. I have said this before, Namita, but it's a fantastic book. Congratulations again on putting it together. It's an instant classic. I've been saying that phrase a lot, but I promise you, it's just today. I don't usually use high praise like that. It's a fantastic book. And I'm very curious about the genesis of the book. You come from a Pahari family. Translated, Pahari literally means off the mountains. I wonder if that had something to do with it. But I'd love to hear why you thought of putting it together.
I'm a bit sort of awkward or embarrassed even by this book at this moment, because just before this we have heard two gentlemen of high intellect telling us about what's going wrong with the world in measured terms. And here my book is much more difficult to substantiate in any terms. A lot of the reviews have said, but do you really believe that? And yes, I really believe in what many of these essays do say. I love editing and curating anthologies because all the people that I meet in festivals, all the skills I have in gathering a diverse group of opinions, and that's why it's called Mystics and Skeptics, because it's not a book about faith alone. It's a book about faith and the perversions and subversions and idiocies of faith. But where it comes from, and this is a very sort of serious statement, the Tantric Buddhism and the other tantric traditions of the mountains are completely different from the religious traditions of the rest of India. The rest of India is more about you pray to the right gods. There are so many of them. You choose the one who gives you wisdom. You choose the one who gives you money. You choose the one that gives you whatever it is that you want. And you seek stability and you seek progress in a material, spiritual plane. First material, then spiritual, usually. And then when you're just about to die, you can sort of move on to an only spiritual plane and not be trouble to your family. But in the mountains, you have people who have abandoned everything else to go on individual quests looking for they don't know what. And that's a passage I'll read out in the end of it. But this crazy quest, individual quests for not only spiritual knowledge, for what they don't know what they are seeking, is what characterizes the 25 essays here by some very renowned scholars and from people who nobody's heard of. And one of the scholars, Ramola Butalia, I was talking to her on the phone the other day, and she said, everything is changing in the mountains. The diversity that we had in the thinking of the mountains is getting flattened out by Instagram posts and things, and the mountains are closing up their mysteries, she said. You know, the feeling of rahasya, of what is secret, what is sacred and mysterious and not to be told, and has to remain a mystery, is there in the Buddhist traditions, in the Tertons and the Terma, that can be found only by those who are blessed or qualified to receive those knowledge fragments, and then to forget about them or not to pass them on if they so please. So I just wanted to record some of the things that in 15 years may be completely forgotten in all the Vaishno Devi temple lookalikes or franchises that come across the whole range of the Himalayas.
You know, it's funny how you started this answer, because while I was listening to Peter and William's talk, I was thinking about our session, and I in fact thought that it was a perfect complement to what they were talking about, because this is history is one lens, and philosophy and faith is another lens to try and make sense of what's happening to nature, to the mountains, and to the earth. But just coming back for a moment, Namita, to your process as an editor, you are close to the subject. I know what the mountains mean to you, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about that as well. But given the closeness to the subject, this book has, I mean, it has essays on fascinating gurus, on traditions that we haven't heard of, but also for Shakti Peeths and Sufi women, extraordinary woman, Sufi saint. How did you go about collating the material? And what was your approach when you started? What did you go out looking for?
It was intuitive as always, happenstance as always, fortunate and blessed as always. Things came into my lap, many of them. And otherwise, I tried to have a grid and fill in things. For example, I did want Guru Nanak there, and then I asked him, because our friend Navtej has written so much on the spiritual traditions of the Sikhs. Andrew Quintman, Milarepa, I've always felt deeply about Milarepa and the whole crazy wisdom traditions that are a part of Buddhist and Hindu life there. So it just came together quite on its own. There were lots of things which I would have wanted to include, but because I couldn't find first-person accounts of them, I wanted these to be personal encounters, not academic essays or researched essays. These were just people who had encountered some of the extremely weird, I would say, mysteries, which most people would find unbelievable. And that's why I tried to find credible voices that would explain that maybe these mysteries are mysteries, but let's not lose them in the mountains, because the mountains are the Himalayas, the sort of the youngest mountains, the tallest mountains, growing every year by a centimeter. They are climbing up. They've decided that this generation or this time is not good for discussing these mysteries, I think. I'm sorry if that sounds weirdo, but that's the way it is, that the silence of the mountains and the serendipity with which you learn things or you don't, has its own logic. Rather, like Peter said, that Priyambada told him that what are the chances of anybody being whatever at this moment. So what are the chances that we are here in the middle of the lap of the Indian Ocean talking about those young and juvenile delinquent mountains that are going up and up and up while the rest of the world is, they are mocking us.
Navtej, I wanted to talk to you. Your essay is about Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak, as you're all familiar, was the first Sikh guru, the founder of Sikhism, if you will. And your essay is about his travels in the Himalayas, and also Guru Gobind Singh, who was the 10th guru, the last guru, his travels and especially his relationship with a particular place at the foothills of the Himalayas. Before we get into that, I wanted you to set the framework by talking a little bit about Guru Nanak's travels, on the whole. You begin your essay by quoting 2 lines on his travels, and what is he wearing, where is he going. There are people who believe he went as far as West Africa, he went to the Mecca, he went to current day Sri Lanka, east, west. Who is he traveling with? So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, thank you, Pragya, and thank you, Namita, for including me in the book. I must confess, although it sounds like the great betrayal sitting here, that if you had asked me to contribute a piece on the mystics and skeptics of the ocean, I would have found myself floundering. Because one thing I've discovered in the last 3 days is I'm not a water person, I'm a mountain person. So I'd rather snorkel in the mountains. Yeah. where I can see where I'm going. But in any case, so thank you for that. The mountains are, before I get to Pragya, to your question, I think for those who sort of seek the mountains, and for those, the mountains almost seek for them. And, there is a certain mystery, it's very difficult to put your finger or put it into words, what the mountains do to you. And so I suppose they do that to, more spiritually evolved people like who have been covered in this book. They do things to them, and, things happen. On the specific chapter that I wrote for this book is on Guru Nanak, but Guru Nanak, besides, of course, lived in the 15th century, early 16th century, was a tremendous traveler, if nothing else. He defined his life by his travels. So he was, from the age of about 19 or 20, he left home in the great tradition of the Udasis, the sense with the journeys of detachment. And then he, from what we have gathered, the one thing he didn't do was to write anything about himself. So whatever we know about his life, his travels, is either from very minor references in the ultimately collected Guru Granth Sahib, or the writings of Bhai Gurdas, who was the kind of eminences of the fifth Guru, and who actually lived along with at least 4 Gurus and helped to write down the first collection of the Adi Granth under the fifth Guru, Guru Arjan. His writings, which we can consider fairly authentic, mention some travels. And the rest of it you get through the Janam Sakhis. The Janam Sakhis were sort of anecdotal biographies of Guru Nanak and his travels, written about 60, 70, 80 years after him. Again, 60, 70, 80 years is not too much. So we have, but many of them are anecdotal, many of them are hagiographic, many of them are fantastic in that sense that they, but again, you can match many of them to places because there's a lot of shrines or gurdwaras or followers in particular places which link up. So he traveled, it's roughly believed that his journeys can be broken up into 4 journeys. He traveled east to begin with, right up to Assam, through Bihar, present day, I'm talking of the present day names. There it's always mentioned Kamrup, which is Assam. The second journey, he goes down south, and he goes right down to Sri Lanka, or present day Sri Lanka, or Ceylon. And there are gurdwaras in Sri Lanka to mark his visit. And he goes on east in the same journeys. He goes down to Orissa. He goes down to, the temples on the coast. And the third journey is to the north, into the mountains. So present day UP, Himachal, Sikkim, Tibet, Nepal, all over the place. So you can find references to Ladakh. You find references to Guru Nanak amongst the Tibetans, among the Bhutanese, Nanak Lama, Nanak Rinpoche. You find gurdwaras in Ladakh. There is Patthar Sahib. You find at Matan Sahib in Kashmir, near the Amarnath caves. And then, of course, he traveled west, the last Udasi. He goes right across and all the way to Baghdad, Mecca, and returns. Now, there are people who have ventured to say that he also went to Jerusalem, he also went to Turkey. There are scholars who have actually drawn maps and itineraries. None of these are really established by fact, and they are projections from these few sources that I mentioned to you. But what we must remember is that Guru Nanak is not an ancient figure. You know, by the kind of spectrum that Peter Frankopan has been painting in his 2 sessions, which goes back deep into history. I mean, he's a modern. You know, it's just 500 years. And I always like to mention this, that when I started writing my book of Nanak, I used to sit in the India Habitat Center library and I would look out of the window and then I could see the Lodi tombs. And the Lodis were ruling Delhi when Guru Nanak was born. And on the other side, I could see the Humayun tomb. And Humayun was on the run at the time when Guru Nanak passed away. And on the middle, you could see the Qutb Minar, which predated his birth by over 200 years. So, you know, we must remember that his teachings were modern. He is a modern kind of sage or saint. So that also shows that much that we know about his travels may be exaggerated, but not by too much.
Coming to his travels in the Himalayas, one question that kept coming up when I was reading this was, what is driving this travel? He's not quite traveling as a missionary, right? He's as much a teacher as he's a seeker, right? What is driving this travel?
I think his whole idea was to explore what is all. I mean, he felt instinctively that there was a lot wrong with the world. And his entire travels are in the sense of exploring, going to places of belief, going to centers of religion, and debating and talking in a very collaborative fashion, not antagonistic. As to his whole thing was to get to the essence of any religion and the commonalities of religion, to cut out the ritual, to question the superstitious.
But recent as it was, what I was actually asking was that your story has an element of what is difficult to understand, conceive, and I wish you'd tell the audience about a little bit about your essay about his travels and the Siddhas who he met there.
Absolutely. So in the third Udasi, which roughly took place between 1515 to 1518, he travels far into the mountains and he goes to what is called Sumer Mountain, Sumeru Mountain, Sumeru Parbat, which many people believe is nothing else than Mount Kailash, the home of Shiv and Parvati. And there he travels into the mountains, and there he is supposed to have had a dialogue with 84 Siddhas, ancient sages meditating there. And as it is said, they were possibly spiritual souls or descendants of the great yogis, Machendranath, Gorakhnath, whose followers were actually very, very prevalent in Punjab and northern India at that time. They were called the Kanphata sect, the split-head sect. And they were all over the place, and there was a lot of, fear and dread and superstition about what they would say and behave. So Guru Nanak has a dialogue with these 84 Siddhas. And they ask him essentially, oh young one, what is the force that brings you to these heights? And he says, I meditated on the name of the Lord and I'm here. And then there is this debate, and they question him, they ask him, how is the world faring down there? So he says it is in a terrible place. I mean, the hedge is eating the field, and this is the age of darkness, the age of sin. And what do you expect if all the wise men have run away into the mountains? So his thing was that salvation does not lie in asceticism. Salvation lies in doing the righteous thing in the world. So don't run away from these problems and sit there. How are we going to solve our problems? And this meeting then is encapsulated later. He had another big meeting with the yogis in Punjab itself. And then he has transformed this into a beautiful poetry of 73 verses, which is included in the Granth Sahib, which is called the Siddh Gosht. And these 73 verses are set to Ramkali measure. And they are all about the issues of what is name, what is God, what is truth, what is renunciation, how to live life. And they are all in a very sort of collaborative fashion. I have a little verse in translation. So let me, no, I don't have it here in original. I'm trying to get to my page. Yeah, 53. Yeah. So one translation which I had done of those couple of verses is here. Charpat. Charpat is one of the old yogis. He asks, "The ocean of the world is deep and impassable. How to get across it, O Nanak? Give me your thoughts about it." And Nanak says, "The one who asks that himself knows. What can I answer him? Truly speaking, how can I answer you, you who think that he has already reached the yonder shore? Like the lotus is unaffected in water, a duck swimming across the current is dry. Similarly, with the mind on the divine utterances and repeating his name, we cross the terrible ocean of the world. He who lives detached, enshrining the Lord in his mind, without desire in the midst of desire, sees and shows the inaccessible and incomprehensible. Of him, Nanak is a slave." So essentially, life is to be lived like a lotus who lives in water, but it does not get dirty, like a duck who can swim without wetting its wings.
The world of Nanak's travels is fascinating for so many reasons. But for me particularly, what struck me was this sort of nature of debate and dialogue, which is so key to Indian faith and spiritual traditions. And then, of course, there are the legends, this sort of, Don Quixote kind of journey with this
Mardana.
With Mardana, who's playing a musical instrument all the while. But then you come to Guru Gobind Singh, and it's fascinating how the geography of the Himalayas is threading so many centuries and so many sort of decades together. Guru Gobind Singh is a product of a very different age, right?
Yeah.
Now we're talking about the 1600s. He's a sort of martial guru. He's the 10th and the last guru. If you could just give us an introduction of what's going on in his life when he gets to Paonta Sahib, and then, what that catalyzes.
You fast forward about 160 years, you fast forward, he's the Guru Nanak is considered the first Guru. Guru Gobind Singh was the 10th and last Guru in human form. And by that time, the entire context of the young community has changed, because there has been conflict. There has been an adopting a martial element has been brought into the community by the 6th Guru, and the community has become a much stronger, as well as a much persecuted by the Mughals and their associates, because they become stronger. They've become a community, while Guru Nanak was an individual just setting out to send the message. But what is important to remember is, through these 10 gurus, while the context changes, the methodology changes, the essential message remains the same. The essential message of the equality of man, the nature of God, your duties in life remains the same. So Guru Gobind Singh, by the time he is just at the age of 9, his father, the 9th Guru, Guru Tegh Bahadur, comes in defense of the religious freedom of religious consciousness of the Kashmiri Pandits. He comes to Aurangzeb at their behest, and Aurangzeb, unable to convert him, unable to sort of have him give up his faith, unable to make him do a miracle which was against Sikh traditions, has him executed in Chandni Chowk, the famous, but the site of the Sisganj Gurdwara. And his head is taken back by a follower at great personal risk to the young Gobind Singh, Gobind Rai then, who was then just 9 years old. So he then sort of, takes on this thing of that the fight for the righteous cause, that it's good if you need to defend your belief with force, then you have to defend your belief with force. And he blends in these years before he goes to the mountain, he blends great academic learning with great martial prowess. So he is at a very young age, he became a master of Farsi, Arabic, Brij Bhasha, Sanskrit, and a great poet, and also a great warrior. So around that time, there were the hill Rajas, the Rajput Rajas of Kelur, Garhwal, and Nahan, Sirmaur, and others, and Guler. And they were all very bothered by his growth, because not just that this was another powerful force in the area, but that he promoted a casteless society, a casteless court, which cut their legs under them, because those entire systems were based on caste and tradition and family and etc. So they tried to win him over, or they tried to make him pay patronage. Kelur asked him, give me this great well-trained elephant of yours, give me this rich canopy, and he was told to take a walk. And then they all sort of combined and started plotting against him. So the only one who was different was the Raja of Sirmaur, Medni Prakash. And he had some sort of devotion to the Guru, and he kept inviting him that come to Nahan. Nahan, if those of you have been there, is just the foothills of Himachal, just above the Yamuna, in the Sirmaur district. A very beautiful place. So finally, after a lot of beseeching, Guru Gobind Singh went there with 500 followers. And he stayed in Nahan as a guest. And it is written that, there was a man-eating white tiger causing havoc in the hills. And everybody was scared of him. And he took him on. And he refused to take him on sitting on a horse and shooting with an arrow, a bow and arrow. So he said, that is not fair. I will fight him on the ground. So he actually took a sword and killed the tiger. And then he was traveling in those areas, and he comes upon this place where legend has it that his horse just stopped, and on the banks of the Yamuna. And he said, okay, I will set up camp here. And this became the famous Paunta, where the horse put his paw. So the Paunta became this Gurdwara on the banks of the Yamuna, where over 4 years, a lot of poetry was written. A lot of Sanskrit classics were translated. The Mahabharata and other classics were translated with the purpose of taking them to the common person, cutting out the Brahmins, so to speak, quote unquote, who could then not wield power over the common person, and to make the common person aware of their heritage, and so that they could get some pride in it. Now, this compilation was called Vidyasagar. The Vidyasagar was unfortunately later lost in the flood when Guru Gobind Singh was deceived by Aurangzeb's men. That's another story. But some copies of these writings remained. And 52 poets used to sit on the banks of the Yamuna and write poetry and do translations. And again, the legend is that they complained that the Yamuna makes too much noise here, we can't think. And he said, okay, it won't happen. And even to the day, actually, if you go and stand behind the Gurdwara, the Yamuna is very, very calm. So he then fought his first battle, because then the Rajas ultimately attacked him. The first major battle of Bhangani, of Guru Gobind Singh, was fought there. and they defeated this tremendous force of Pathans, Hill Rajas, Mughal soldiers, with the help simply of artisans, carpenters, various people who had just, been inspired to fight. So that was that. I think I've probably taken too much of time.
Not at all, not at all. Namita, you choose to write about, your essay is about something deeply personal to you, about your own spiritual guru, Neem Karoli Baba, and Siddhima, of course. I'll let you introduce Neem Karoli Baba to this audience and those listening to us on YouTube, and tell us a little bit about how he came to be your guru.
See, I wouldn't call him my spiritual guru in that sense. I was always deeply skeptical of Neem Karoli Baba when I first met him as a little girl. As a child, he'd come to our home, but he was just one of the most incredible personages anybody could ever encounter, and I'm very, very fortunate to have known him as a little girl. Not known him, but met him. Neem Karoli Baba is a sort of patron saint to all the Kumaon and Uttarakhand hills. He came and settled there, and his own learnings transformed there. He is called the patron saint of Silicon Valley and the quantum saint. Yeah, it's no exaggeration. The book is selling really well there. There's a book on Siddhima, and he, Larry Brilliant was there, Larry Page was there, Google was almost conceived there, Steve Jobs came there, Mark Zuckerberg came a little later, I'm told, and asked for chicken curry, but I don't know about that. But I think the reason why that happened was that here was somebody who had great spiritual powers, but with that generation of American seekers, he met people, the local Paharis who I knew or had seen would go and say, can you get a job for my son? Can my daughter get married? These sort of things. Can this law case be solved? And he would say, ha. But these people were asking him all deeply spiritual questions. So it's like in a kindergarten, if somebody is asking a new set of questions, the children, then it stimulates this. And it's there's an international community around Neem Karoli Baba, which we have encountered in the most unlikely places, including Boulder or the ashram in Taos. And I have just had such incredible personal experiences of what could be called miracles, and which I will call miracles because they were, and small miracles, big miracles, that I accept that. But he's not a Santa Claus guru for me who will solve my problems. It's just somebody I'm deeply grateful to have encountered some non-linear thinking and a sense of the vast possibility of just about anything being possible in this world, which is what I think he unleashed with all those tech gurus in Silicon Valley.
Those of us who don't have access to gurus, I think your book does that wonderfully. It just introduces us to the idea of non-linear thinking. But the other sort of mystic saint, if you please, that you feature in the book, I think there are 2 essays on Milarepa. And Milarepa is this fascinating man. I mean, he's a sort of early beginnings as a murderous, vengeful person who then goes on to become one of the most powerful figures in Tibetan Buddhism, and a poet, and of course, then legends develop around him. But, the first time I heard about Milarepa was before this book was probably conceived. Of course, the person who told me about Milarepa was Namita. And I would love for you to introduce, your fascination with Milarepa to the audience.
Well, many years ago, I'd read the book by W.Y. Ivan Vance, I hope I've said that. It's a book called Tibet's Great Yogi, and I read it when I was very young, and it just impacted me. And since it was out of copyright, we quoted it intensively. When I did the festival in Bhutan and also in Boulder, I met many Milarepa scholars. And so I could really access some of the best voices on Milarepa. Again, a poet like Guru Nanak. 1,000 songs of Milarepa are beautiful and deeply moving, and a part of Tibetan and life around the world, in fact. So what I loved about Milarepa was his early vengeful nature, because that's what I still do feel like. I want to put hailstorms on my enemies and destroy them and do those things. And then slowly his Naropa and Marpa, his gurus, trained him to become more noble. In the end, he was so noble, I don't want to get that noble, that when he was given the poisoned cup by his co-director, Willie, are you listening? He said, nothing. Then he drank it because he felt his time had come. So there was the whole history of the evolution of Milarepa and the crazy wisdom tradition. Begins at some point. I mean, it's difficult to say where it begins. They say Siberian shamanism entered it, the Bonpo religion entered all these trains of thought. But he, to me, because his life was so well documented by Heruka, who lived about 1,000 years after him, not 1,000, about 100 years after him, sorry, the brain is not working. He just represents the two polarities of the life as we live, and the life that we can, I mean, some people can aspire to. Very frankly, I'm more of the skeptic, and I don't aspire at all to that very noble life. But Milarepa, and that same tradition then came down to Neem Karoli Baba and the Nath Gurus and all this, of crazy wisdom, of not only intuitive thinking, which is easy enough, but counterintuitive and counterintuitive and counterintuitive, and in so many circular and complicated ways of secret learning, really.
You know, it's interesting, something that Sanjeev, I think, was talking about, Sanyal, I don't know if he's around, but he was talking about in one of the sessions about how, you know, Indian religious traditions just defy the sort of Abrahamic point of view of, you know, silos. And, you know, you're talking about a Tibetan guru, we were talking about a Sikh guru, and another thing that's common between them, if I remember, is that both are supposed to have gone up Mount Kailasha, which is Shiv's abode. But, you know, we've spoken a lot about these wonderful essays. I don't know how many of you have read the book, so I thought it would be a good idea for all of us to perhaps, if there is time, read something from the book. Perhaps if you could start, Namita, maybe you'd like to read something from your wonderful introduction. Or any other passage, of course.
I've got a short. I'm a bit obsessive about time. I always want to finish early and get on, and you have to go to the sandbank. But I'll read from the introduction. It says, in one sojourn across the Himalaya, it is best to be cautious in chance encounters, for it is impossible to decipher if one is encountering a saint, a siddha, a madman, or a charlatan. This was the advice given by an intensely religious man, an elderly tantric and a scholar when I was young, and I have kept this counsel close to my heart. The gods come to us in many disguises, he told me. They may come to you with a boon, or they may leave you with a curse if you do not conduct yourself in the right way. There is an inner logic to these stories that may not at first be visible to the reader. These are encounters and quests, wanderings and lost paths, disappointments and betrayals. But they carry the spirit of the seeker, of the search, and the continuing journey within them. If the reader gets a sense of our mountains, the mysteries that lie hidden in the Himalaya, and the blessings and benedictions that they carry, the book's task is done, its mission accomplished. So I just wanted to record some of these deep stories which in one place so that people could. And I just love the idea of that early lit fest by Paunta Sahab that you described with the, yeah, where the Yamuna stopped.
Navtej, perhaps something from you, maybe from a different
yeah, there are
chapter?
so many beautiful essays in this book that it's difficult to choose. But there was one that I felt particularly close to, and that's by the, you know, put together by the Bhutanese writer Shering Tashi. And he talks about the trance runners. And these are trance runners are supposed to be people in the Buddhist Tibetan tradition who can walk very long distances in very short time without showing any signs of it. So it's a kind of a tantric skill that they acquire through very hard work, and it's called, you know, riding the wind. So he talks of the master trance runner that he finds in Bhutan. And I'll just read out a para and then tell you why it feels very special to me. The trance runner is called Lopen Chuki. Lopen in Bhutanese and Tibetan is teacher, simply. So I first met the master Lopen Chuki in 1995 in Paro, Bhutan, where he came to perform my grandfather's last funerary rites. My uncle and I were given the responsibility to drop him to Thimphu and then escort him to his monastery in Phajoding on top of the hill in Thimphu. The walk to the retreat house used to take over 4 hours of strenuous climbing. At that time, I was 22 years old. Being a sportsman, I was fit, but the Lopen was about 69 years old and looked frail. Yet he could walk effortlessly, and my uncle and I found it hard to keep up with him. The Lopen carried a cloth bag that he slung over his shoulder. He wore cheap Chinese plastic shoes with no socks. He pulled up his monk robe to his ankles, and I did not hear him pant or short of breath even once. During the 4-hour climb, he would occasionally stop near a chorten and wait for us, and offer us betel nuts, which he chewed rather aggressively. Finally, when we reached his monastery, which is on the ridge of the mountain above 4,000 meters, I found that my shirt was completely drenched in sweat. I had to stay near the fire to dry my shirt and keep myself warm. As expected, at that altitude, I was out of breath, and it took a while before I could refill my lungs with air. But the Lopen did not show any of these signs. He quickly lit the fire and was busy preparing tea for us. And then he goes on and on. But why this it touched something is because we used to live in Thimphu, and our house was just below Phajoding. And I have actually done that climb because my ambassador, who must have been then at the ripe old age of about 52 or something, had a guest from the World Bank, and the World Bank guy was much fitter, and he said, I want to go up. So I was called as a young 30-year-old first secretary and said, you will accompany this guest up to Phajoding tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. And so I sort of saluted, and I went up, and I did this 4-hour journey. So, everything that he writes about it has an immediacy, and I can just imagine the wind blowing on that bare ridge, and, and this old man just walking up as if riding that wind.
Just to say that Sharon goes on to, the writer goes on to talk about how he tries to, the essence of trance runners is also that they don't talk about trance running. They keep it a secret, they don't identify themselves as trance runners, and then how the writer, who himself is a Tibetan Buddhist monk, tries to find out if he indeed is a trance runner, and he is basically told to take a walk. And the man will not reveal his secret, and that is serendipity, because that's how Namita started this conversation about how the mountains value and the mountain people value mysteries and rahasya. And the other serendipity is that we started the first session of the day was about stillness, and trance running is about finding stillness in motion. So with those two lovely coincidences, I think it's time to call it an evening. And if there are any questions, I'm sure Namita and Navtej will take it later.
I'm also, because of my other duties, my co-director is sitting here, I think we all got to get to the sandbank. We can have the conversations about this. But everybody who's sitting here has actually been blessed to hear about some of these secrets, some of these things, and to contribute to these. So I think we should let people do their quick change around before they hit the heights of the sandbank.